Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill, and I'm with UC Health and the Aspen Club, and it's been an honor and privilege to be part of the planning committee for the summit, but it's also an honor and privilege to introduce your next speaker. So Elizabeth Garner is coming up. She is the state demographer and has been with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs since 2004. A primary focus of her office is to show the relationship between jobs, people, and community services like housing, education, and healthcare, which happens to be some of the priority issues we've been working on. Elizabeth and her office have been leading the state's effort for Census 2010 and the release of all that data, and then the census to come. And I always like to ask what they do in their spare time. And she says she has 2 kids that keep her incredibly busy. She loves tennis and gardening. And I asked her what the best part of her job is. And she says it's going to sound incredibly dorky, but she loves research, she loves service, and this job truly allows her to combine both. I think you're going to really benefit from what we learned from our Colorado demographer. Let's again welcome Elizabeth Garner.
Typically, I have to apologize for being here. You know, a lot of people are thinking to themselves, great, she's just going to throw all of these statistics at us for the next 45 minutes. Fortunately, it's early in the day. Hopefully the caffeine is still rumbling through the system. But I will tell you that it was really nice that Sandy actually said I was okay. She was a great speaker and I think a great way to energize the group. But she also said, well, make sure you know what your demographer, or make sure you understand the demographics for your area. So I feel like I've got a little bit of an okay working with you guys here. So this is not the first time I've been up to Fort Collins and been to Larimer County and been involved with the aging. That being said, thank you for inviting me to come back. That means I didn't upset you maybe too much the first time around. For those of you that aren't aware of our agency, and I'd just like to put this up here so that people are aware that the State Demography Office is in the Department of Local Affairs, which is a state agency in Colorado. We do a lot of public service and public information. So whether or not you're involved with a local government or state agency, just remember that we are a service that's available for everyone and anyone. You don't need to be in the local government sphere to be involved with or to even ask for information. Actually, it's great. We're a group of 6 and we're all nerds, but we love to talk on the telephone. So if you like to call or even email, we do answer emails, feel free to give us a call. I think it's important when we're talking about aging and talking about what that impact is going to be in Larimer County that we really understand first, well, how fast are we growing to begin with? And this is just a quick slide to show you where we fit into the Colorado and U.S. picture. Between 2013 and 2014, the U.S. population increased by about 0.7%, by about 2.3 million. Most important piece then to look at is then where did Colorado fall? Well, we increased to about 5.3 million, an increase of 1.6%. So quickly you're doing some basic math and saying, okay, we're growing at least twice as fast as the U.S. as a whole, and that's important to know. And we're growing relatively fast to other states, 4th fastest in terms of percentage change, and 8th fastest in terms of absolute change, an increase of about 83,000 people. But I will put that into a little bit of perspective. 1 county in Texas increased by our total state population. However, within Colorado as a whole, we had some counties increase by 15,000. And other counties declined by 400. So this growth in Colorado is disparate. And so it's important to see, well, where does Larimer fit into this? This slide shows a picture of the state by county, and it's highlighted for the time period of 2010 to 2014. And all of the red, orange, yellow counties are those that have increased in population. All of the shades of blue are counties that have declined in population. So even though we are growing faster than the US, growing fast relatively to other states, we've got 27 counties that are declining in population. And some of the question is why? What is it about that area? But what we can see is that definitely Larimer is in that area of faster growing, and even this last year increased by, it was like 7,800 people just in 1 year in terms of looking at both the natural increase and net migration. Which is then this next slide. When we increase in population, there's two big pieces. Net migration, which is green, and then natural increase, which is orange. And natural increase is births minus deaths. So what we're experiencing for the state as a whole is that over time, about 55% of our total population change is due to net migration, and then that remaining 45 is due to natural increase, which is births minus deaths. When we migrate people to the state, what kind of folks do we attract? We attract youngins. And this is age along the horizontal axis, and really between the ages of kind of 25 and 37 is our bread and butter. That's where we really attract a lot of people. Do we attract a lot of people over the age of 65? The red line is at 65. No, not so much, but it is above 0. Okay, historically, we actually used to have a net out migration. So this last decade that we looked at between 2000 and 2010, we were showing a net increase of about 6,000, so not a lot, about 600 people a year. What does it look like for Larimer? Well, this is your age distribution of net migrants, and what we can see is dominated by the youngins. And that has to do with your university. So you in-migrate a lot of young people that go to school. And you'll notice quickly that the peak here is 3,000. The peak here when they leave is only about 1,500. So you retain a lot of those students in the area. And you know, it totally makes sense. They come here, they fall in love with the place, then they find a job, and they stay. And I really appreciated a lot of Sandy's comments in terms of looking at a community where you can age over time. And the point here is that most of them come when they're really young. And it's impressive that really you don't lose that many. And then you've got about a net increase from the age 40 plus. Then there's some movement around 65. And then it's pretty positive over the age 65. Not huge though. The net migration between 2000 and 2010 was about 4,500 people over the age 65 migrating into the county. That's about 470 we'll go with, people per year migrating in over the age of 65. And I think that's really important to be thinking about in terms of, are you really a magnet for seniors or people over the age 65 or not? Are you like in Arizona or Florida, or where do you fit into that picture? Now I know that there's a ton of text on this, and it's primarily so I can remember what I was going to say. A lot of people ask, well, where do our migrants come from? And so this chart up here talks a little bit about it. If we look at the overall population, the largest states that send people to Colorado are from California, Texas, Arizona, Florida, and Illinois. The largest receiving states from Colorado are Texas, California, Arizona, Florida, and then Washington. So what we do is a ton of trading. We're trading folks back and forth. Then if we look at it just at the 65 plus, the folks that primarily send people to our state are Texas, Nebraska, Arizona, Illinois, and Florida. Those are the ones that are sending people over the age 65 to Colorado. Those that we're sending people to, Arizona, Florida, Texas, Idaho? What's in Idaho? And then maybe even more questionable, Minnesota? It is freezing there. But I think it's important to know, who do we do our trading with? Again, if we look at the net migration of that 65 plus to the state or to the county, it averaged at about that 470. And since 2010, it's been about that same amount, a little over 500 a year. And to put it into perspective, that's only about 15% of your population increasing of that 65 plus. So what's the only way you can become part of that 65 plus population? Age, have a birthday. So if we look at all of the people that turned 64 to 65, there was about 3,300 people in the county that turned into that 65. About 15%, or about 500 of them, came in from out of county. Most of Larimer County's in-migrants come from other counties in Colorado. So it's interesting to see, and a lot of it is just, what what you're aware of, what you hear about. You were the fourth, I believe, fastest or highest share of net in-migrants of that 65 plus population, behind Broomfield, Douglas, Elbert, and then ones that are close by are Weld, Adams, Arapahoe, and Mesa. Now, we do expect that share of the 65 plus to continue to decline over time as a net in-migrant, primarily because it's been a trend historically that migration at that 65 plus is slowing down. And the rest of our base is going to be growing faster, so that percent will not be there. So taking all of that into account, what do we look like in Larimer County? And this is you. You're a series of colors. But this is an age distribution for Larimer County. Age is along the horizontal axis, and numbers are along the vertical. The colors represent your generation. If you were born between 28 and 45, this is the silent generation. Then we've got the boomers that are purple. We've got your Gen Xers that are green. And then we've got your millennials that are red. And then cleverly named Generation Next, we've got the darker blue. What we can quickly see is that there's a significant difference in that age group of the silent generation and the baby boomers. And that's really why you're going to be feeling this change in age so significantly in Colorado as a whole, but also in Larimer County. Now, when we looked at Colorado's age distribution of migrants, and then as well as Larimer County's, what age is it focused at? Young, 25 to 34. How long does it take a 25 to 34-year-old to turn 65? It takes about 30 to 40 years, depending where you came into that. So most of this aging actually is just us celebrating birthdays every year and getting to that point. The first time period that Colorado really experienced a lot of in-migration were the 70s. So it fits perfectly that we're into that spot. The other piece that that I want you guys to notice is that we've got two age groups that are significantly large, the boomers and the millennials. And in between are the Gen Xers, which is I know, celebrate the Gen X. I'm there too, man. It's a great generation. But we're smaller. And we're at a different age time than these two other generations. And thinking about housing, you've got two huge, or not just housing, but all services. You've got two huge generations competing for the same market. You've got your person that maybe would like to downsize a smidge, but not go into a nursing home. And you've got your first-time home buyer. And they're both competing for the same product. So it's important to be thinking about that when we're planning communities and thinking about what's going on and why we've seen such price escalation. And so who do you think's going to win? Who has the assets? Yeah, it's the older generation tends to have that asset. Not everyone, but a significant number of them. And so I know a lot of people are saying, oh, the millennials, all they want are condos and townhomes and apartments. It could be that that's all they can afford. I wouldn't suggest that that's a trend for a lifetime, because as soon as those millennials, which are now between the ages of 15 and 35, I mean, a good half of them are still at home, if not more, maybe 80%. But as soon as they start getting together with other millennials and creating Gen Next, then they might want what everybody else has wanted, that single family home with a little bit of yard so that they can play with the kids and feel safe. And not that many folks are going to want to raise families necessarily in condos and townhomes. Nothing against them, but we've seen historically over time where people have different demands. So I'm just suggesting that we can't be convinced 100% that it is a trend that all millennials want to rent and own and be in a condo. If we look at the previous decade between 2000 and 2010, how did we age in Larimer County? So what I want to explain are the blue bars is that percent change in growth, each by an age group. So down here we're young at under 5. Up here we're over at the 85 plus. The red line is how fast the county itself grew. So it increased by about 19% during that time period. So any blue bar above the red line grew faster than the county as a whole. And we start seeing that happen at age 55. The green line is how fast the 65 plus population increased. And that was by, I'm going to have to look over here, 45, 48% during that time period. And then we can easily quickly see we've got a lot of these green bars above that, a lot of the blue bars above the green line. I'm having a hard time with my colors. What's important to see is that your 85 plus increased significantly, as well as all of these other age groups. So when people start talking about the aging in Larimer County, actually you've been, well, first of all, everybody's been doing this forever, right? You've been aging forever, which is a good thing because the alternative isn't good necessarily. You need to be aging. But it's important to know that you've actually been aging in the 65 plus for at least 10 years in that significant growth. So you've already kind of been exposed to this fast growth. So I'm not going to get into the gory details of how we produce population forecasts, but know that there is an economic component and a demographic component. The demographic being basically we take all of you and we age you through time, apply birth rates and death rates, and that creates a supply of people. And where we're looking is that Colorado as a whole increasing from about 5.3 million to about 7.8 million by 2040. And the reason I bring this into account is that, yes, we're aging, and aging is good, but we're also just growing, which is also okay. I'm not going to put a judgment on it because people have different perspectives, but showing that we're continuing to forecast increased growth. If we think about it by county, we're forecasting an increase of about 2.7 million people between 2010 and 2040, with 2.1 of it along the Front Range, 1.2 million in the Denver metro area, 500,000 shared between you and Weld, another 400,000 shared down south between El Paso and Pueblo, with the remaining 600,000 spread around the rest of the state. Maybe. That's our forecast based on current conditions. But we could have some constraints. Anybody listening to NPR this morning heard about water constraints? And that may play into it, especially in terms of how it affects housing. But this is showing the median home value across the U.S. by county. Darkest color being those with a median home value over $260,000. Quickly, you can kind of focus on the state of Colorado. We have a lot of dark red in the state compared to a lot of other interior areas and places that we compete with. Now, granted, coastal areas definitely have a lot more red, but we need to be thinking about housing costs because when people make choices to move places, housing is certainly one of the conditions along with jobs. If we bring it a little bit closer, then we can see within the state, again, the darkest color being the highest median home value, over $300,000, and then the lightest being under $125,000. But we can see that Larimer is in that grouping of 225 to 300. So you're dealing with some fairly high home values in the county, especially compared to maybe neighboring Weld, but certainly lower than Boulder. And we know that that impacts, obviously, people choosing to live in the county. When then we look at people paying over 30% of their income on housing, and this is for those that have a mortgage, Larimer's okay. It's in this grouping of 35 to 40%. But this highest color red is where over 45% of the households are spending more than 30% of their income. The reason I bring this up is just because housing costs could be a constraint for future growth in Larimer. If now we look at it just in terms of renters, it really increases for Larimer. Now, granted, to where over 50% of the households that are renting are paying more than 30% of their income on rent. Now, a lot of this could be due to the students and the impact of the students. But if you're thinking about the rental market as a whole, as an option, potentially for the 65 plus, this is something that I think is really important to be thinking about in terms of that price and demand for that product. So why are we getting old so fast? I still only get one present, one cake, one balloon every year, but only once a year. Yet Colorado always comes up in the top group of states that's aging really fast. And part of that has to do with the fact that we're really young. You're like, what? We're aging really fast because we're young? Yes, we're aging really fast because we're young. You saw how we migrate people to the state. We don't migrate a lot of people over the age 65. We have the fourth lowest share of people over the age 65 in the state, in the country. But we do have a bunch of boomers. And I couldn't see well. How many boomers? Oh, look at all of your friends. There's about 1.3 million boomers in the state. And if all goes well, over the next 15 years, all of them will be aging over the age 65. They're about 26% of our total population, and by 2030, Colorado's population 65 plus will be about 125% larger than it was in 2010, increasing from about 555,000 to 1.2 million just from celebrating birthdays. Are we all of a sudden going to become an old state? No. Why? Because we migrate youngins. If we stopped migrating youngins, then we may get older, but our age distribution definitely keeps us young. When is going to be the fastest growing decade of that 65 plus? Oh, now. Yes, right now. Between 2010 and 2020, increasing by 61%, or 6.1% per year. How fast is the state growing? 1.5. So we are increasing at 4 times as fast as the state as a whole. that 65 plus population, followed by another decade increasing by about 4% per year. Now, there was a question that came up earlier for Sandy, wondering how do you inform the business community about this? Well, yeah, there's two sides, obviously the employment side and the market side. But since when does your market grow at 6% per year? All businesses should be taking a look at this number if they're looking at demographics and who owns majority of the wealth in this age group. This just shows age distributions again, 1990, 2010, and 2030. Again, age along the horizontal axis, wanting to show this significant growth in this aging piece. But what I also want to highlight is that at the same time, we're going to have growth in the young population. So between 1990 and 2010, we had an increase primarily in this 45 to 64-year-old age group, as well as the young. Very little change in the 65 plus, which is illustrated by the black line. But between 2010 and 2030, we see a large growth in this 65 plus, as well as younger ages. So at the same time that we're feeling potential constraints, maybe, at that aging population, at the same time, we're going to feel aging in the younger populations. Why? Because a lot of the folks aging will be aging out of the labor force. Now, I'm not suggesting that at 65, everybody throws in the rope and decides to go on vacation. No. But even starting as early as 55, we know that there's a big drop in labor force participation rate. And typically by 75, you see at least everybody, most people out of the labor force. Some people are still in there. So I age out, I create a job by me aging out. I spend money in the market, I create a quarter of a job by my spending. So just for me having a birthday, I'm creating 1.25 jobs. And that's why we have this demand for this young population, is to fill all the job demands created by the aging of the population. Whereas Larimer, increasing from about 35,000 to about 80,000 by 2030. There's a 63% increase in the population between 2010 and 2020, followed by another 38% between 2020 and 2030. The different colors represent the ages 65 to 74 in the blue, followed by 75 to 84, then increasing to 85 plus. Now we know at the younger ages that that service demand isn't there as much. And that's where we see a lot of the growth in this current population. As they age, then we'll start seeing demand or growth in the ages that require more service demand. So I think that that's one of the most important takeaways, is to see when this aging is going to take place, and to recognize that it is you and your neighbors. Migrants from other counties or other states are not the largest share of this aging. It really is, how do you call them, Laramarians? No. What are they called? Laramers? I don't know. Laramites. And this is just to show again, this looks between 2010 and 2030. Even though we're talking about this significant growth in the 65 plus, remember that you're going to have growth in all age groups. So I really appreciated Sandy's comments on, that we are looking community-wide, because this population change is going to affect everyone. This is just Larimer's age distribution, again, to re-illustrate that growth in all age groups, with blue being 2010 and purple being 2040, that we see a lot of growth in the under 65 as well as the over 65. When we look at the state as a whole, the fastest growing counties are the darkest color. The darkest color is over 75% increase in the population 65 plus. So Larimer certainly isn't at the top of the group, but it is in this darker color that's 50 to 75%. Tons of issues, and I know that speakers throughout the day are going to be hitting on these, talking about disabilities, housing, transportation, economic driver, labor force, and public finance. Martin will be going over that as the next speaker. Housing, we brought up real quick. is going to be one of the biggest issues I think that this county has to deal with. Because people will decide to age in place, I think the big takeaways is that 80% of the population ages in place, and 81% are homeowners. And I'm going to actually just tie it up due to time, but can answer any of these questions in terms of how many movers there are and what age are their movers, in terms of that there's not, most people are non-movers as they age. About 92% are non-movers, and a large share are owners. We'll have issues with disabilities, issues with Alzheimer's, issues with poverty. So just to tie it up and to think about, is really the largest growth in the 65 plus will be your current population. And are you ready? Are you really ready to cope with those aging issues and resource issues and housing issues and transportation issues? So these numbers are coming. This does not have you set as a mecca, as in Arizona or Florida for the aging population. You may decide to go after that population and decide you want to market to the 65 plus. If so, let me know so I can change the forecast. And honestly, we met with Mesa. Mesa County is actively going after seniors. So we've had to change their forecast. So if things change within the county, let me know. But with that, I think I will tie it up and see if there are any questions.
So first question, rumor that I heard, older adults are retiring and moving here because kids have moved here and have grandkids. Is this really happening?
So at least so far, yes. I mean, we hear that as a rumor. So far, it hasn't shown up in the data that we have not seen a transition basically since 2000. You're holding constant since 2000. Now, it could be that they've already started, so that you really aren't any different than you were in 2000 to 2010 to right now in 2015.
So are these slides going to be available? I don't know if we're putting them on the website or.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah. So I imagine we'll have a link at the Partnership for Age-Friendly Communities website, and then probably Office on Aging as well. The need for moderately priced single-story homes. The need is for those homes. However, houses going, most of the houses being built are two-story homes. Is this something that is changing or will change? Is someone paying attention to this?
So I think that's a really important question for especially to bring the developers into the choices and working with the city and seeing what's being approved and not approved. I think it's really hard, and what we've seen throughout the state is that land prices are escalating. The only way to create the square footage is to go vertical, when really what we want is that single story. So I think that those are the kinds of conversations that need to happen. And this is no offense if any of you are developers, but developers are notoriously slow. But they're capital intensive. It takes them about 3 years to ramp up a project. So talk to them now so that maybe eventually they'll hear you.
Which counties provide the greatest kind of increase of 65 plus migrants?
Ooh. So I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you which county gets the highest increase in 65 plus migrants. Jefferson County notoriously has been there, primarily because they've got a lot of services and a lot of retirement homes. And it's not that everybody's looking for retirement homes, but when they do decide to move, maybe at 85 plus, that's what they're looking for. That's when you get that migration movement. Interesting, Denver, net out. I know, really. I think a lot of that has to do with
Metro or
price.
just Denver?
Denver. Okay. Yeah, Denver County. It's. I think it probably has to do with price. And Elizabeth Borden is going to be speaking this afternoon. I think she can probably talk about the housing prices and availability for different services.
Please talk about the recently passed bill that allows for a strategic planning committee to analyze potential impacts of Colorado's aging population.
I think that the more people that are studying it is good. I wasn't even asked about the bill. So that's my only thoughts on it, is that really if people are trying to engage it, they should be engaging me as well. Not that I'm like trying to be self-centered, but you know, we're doing the forecast, we're doing the numbers piece, and so I was a little disheartened with that, but I think a lot of it is because I feel like not enough collaboration is going on within the state, and so I think that that's what they're trying to build.
This one's a pretty easy one unless you have a clarification. Someone asked, do you have any statistics on the number of seniors living alone? But one of your last slides, I think, had it at 38%, so that's Colorado as a whole?
That's Colorado as a whole, and that is available by county. So we can make sure that, you know, this is my contact information. You can also hit our website, but we can help you get that number for each county specifically. But it's not too far off nationally, that it's about that same level. About 38% of the 65 plus live alone.
Do you have any data on the percentage of elderly that are disabled, especially as compared to younger groups?
So currently, of that 65 plus, about 34% have a disability. However, the probability of disability, if you can say that quick, increases with age. So at about 85 plus, about 50% will have some type of a disability and need assistance with everyday tasks, which I think was similar to a number that Sandy had shared as well.
Do you have any information on changes in income or assets for all ages, but particularly for 65 plus? It seems that there's a decrease in pensions and savings, along with an increase in housing costs and healthcare costs.
You know, that's a really good question, and we're trying to come up with better ways to measure it. So one of the big differentiations between the silent generation, which is before the boomers, is that the boomers was the first generation where you had women primarily in the labor force. So what we've actually seen is household wealth and household assets increase between the silent generation and the baby boomers. Because of that fact that there's dual income earners. But has it kept up with the cost of living is always questionable. And just recognizing is that there is going to be a lot of people over the age 65. Some of them were really good about saving, and they were in that 45 to 64-year-old age group during the 90s, where, I mean, asset accumulation, wealth accumulation, if they were working, they were getting bonuses. I've never gotten a bonus. Granted, I work for the state. So they had, you know, if they did well during the 90s, then they did well. But then there are some folks that just said, woo, I'm going to spend my money. So there's a lot of people that are going to be low income. There's going to be a lot of people that are really high, and then a significant number in the middle. One of the slides I didn't really talk about too much is that just if we hold the concept that poverty for the 65 plus stays at 8%, which is currently the national number for the number of people over 65 in poverty is 8%. If we just keep that constant and say that that's not going to change, that will still, for Colorado, increase the number of seniors in poverty from 40,000 to over 80,000 just by 2025. So regardless of how you changed in wealth, if it just stays the same, we're going to have a slew of people in poverty over the age 65.
What will be the growth rate or absolute rate of low-income seniors in Iowa County? That's pretty much what you just did, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is no good number to do a growth rate on it, but if we assume the same rate.
Do you feel that planning departments will start looking more at universal accessibility for new housing?
You know, I really hope so, and I was really encouraged by what Sandy was saying. In terms of it seems like the APA and other groups in planning are starting to recognize this piece. I know I've gone to several meetings where they talk about that universal planning or universal design, that anything that works for a 2-year-old works for an 80-year-old. And so, I know, isn't that good? So I'm encouraged. One of the goals I have this year, and it's been something in our department that we've been talking about, is to get out there more with the planners to talk about this important factor.
Could you talk a little bit more about the development of the generation groups, Gen X and those type of things? I mean, are those really seen as kind of clear cohorts, or is that more of a statistical kind of useful statistical measure? Just wondering if there's a debate on that or if it's pretty.
The things that create generations are typically events. And so the creation of the baby boom generation was actually an event where fertility increased. And that lasted all the way through until about 1964. And then there was a remarkable decline in fertility rates. And then that's what started, and I don't know if anybody would remember this, but Gen X used to actually be called baby bust. And so we saw this decrease in fertility rates. And then we saw an increase in fertility rates with the millennials. Not infertility rates, an increase in births. And they were initially called, what? What? Echo boom, very good, or boomerang. I know, pretty clever, huh? And so you'll see things put out by Pew and other areas where they'll break it at maybe a little bit different years, but this is in general, these are these concepts, but I don't want anybody to ever think that all boomers are this, or all millennials are this, because that's not how we've ever been, and that's not how they are. And I've got a team, so my team right now is 3 of us are Xers and 3 of us are millennials. And the difference in the Xers even are completely different of what we want, where we live, our lifestyles, completely different, all of us. And we're all nerds. And we're still totally different. I know. I think it's important to recognize again that there are a lot of non-movers, that people over the age of 65 tend to be non-movers. And they tend to be owners. So it's important to see where their assets are, to see what that next choice will be. I do recognize that there is a huge struggle right now in terms of housing and being able to downsize. Every community I've gone to, and I've gone to 7 counties this month, well, between April and May, all of them are struggling in terms of talking about somebody in their kind of 55 plus that wants to downsize, and there is no housing stock. Everywhere. It doesn't matter. I was in Teller, I was in Delta County of all places, where it's experiencing population decline, still can't find those housing types. So I think that that's important to talk about, is housing is huge. Disabilities we talked about, Alzheimer's, just even if you multiply Alzheimer's, and you say, make the assumption that 10% of the population over 65 has Alzheimer's, that increases from about 50,000 folks in Colorado to over 120,000 folks by 2030. Do we have enough Alzheimer care units in the state? This is just assuming that we're staying the same, that we're not going to see an increase in the rate of Alzheimer's. I know poverty, some of the people were shaking their heads saying, no, poverty's higher for the seniors than that. And that could be the case. Then that would make it even scarier in terms of looking at affordable housing units for that aging population. So again, just assuming that the poverty rate stays at 8%, increasing for the state as a whole, from that 40,000 to over 80,000 to over 100,000 by, and almost 120,000 by 2040. So with that, have you had enough numbers?